Welcome everybody. I am inspired to be launching these sets of interviews with somebody very special and dear to my heart, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to her today. I'm over in London and at the moment, and she's in Nairobi, Kenya, and I want to give a very, very special, heartfelt, warm hug and welcome to Sadia Ibrahim. Welcome, Sadia. Lovely to have you today. Where are you at the moment?
Thanks so much, Jeanette. I'm actually very excited to be part of your series speaking about the Epiphany process. I'm currently in the boardroom of the new radio station that I work with now. It's part of the Mo Sound Events and NRG Radio family. It's called Choice Radio. When I met you, I think it was January of 2010 at Dorman's Coffee Shop at the Junction Mall.
Yeah, at the Junction, what we called the office. Yeah.
Yep. That's when you were writing your book, Full Circle Rainbow, and I had started working with a radio station then. So you've kind of just been around me this whole time when I've been on air, haven't you?
In fact, we've just celebrated the 10th anniversary of the publishing of that book. So that's how far you and I go back, and with this process, which is just so inspiring. I remember you pitching up because there were a group of us, weren't there, that met there to work on the internet. In those days, that was very unique, is to be able to use internet in a communal place. And we actually used to say, are you coming to the office tomorrow? And you pitched up and said, I've got to have a picture of all of this. So that's where it came from. And Sadia, what happened? What happened to push you into working alongside me with the process and moving on? What was it that made you go, okay, I've got to do this initially?
Well, when I met you and I heard about your story and the book, it kind of made me think. I think I was 21 when I met you. I'm 32 in August this year. So when I met you, I was 21. I was still discovering myself, coming from a very, I don't want to say suppressed, but a very staunch Muslim family with their own belief systems and their own way of living and traditions and all that we had to kind of follow because we were conditioned to do so. Riz, my brother, and I, who I actually met you through, we always questioned everything, and there were never any answers for them. So I would always question the religion, the book, everything that we used to do, everything that we were taught. And because there were no specific answers, I chose to find my own answers, basically. And that's when I thought of you. And I remember you used to do life coaching at the time, and I was like, okay, I think I need a bit of guidance in a new realm in life. And that's when I did the course with you from December 2012 to May of 2013.
Yeah, we worked closely together. It was wonderful. We used to get up really early in the mornings.
Yeah.
And I reckon we were one of the forerunners of doing courses online, because everybody else thought it was madness. But I'm so glad now, because everything's in place with all that's happened with coronavirus. It's been happening for 10 years with us. So very special. And so you found that you found a new sense of vision and purpose, and that helped you. And then something really big happened in your life, and it was a really traumatically shocking happening for you. Do you feel up to sharing that?
Absolutely. I mean, when I think about it now, this is September of 2013 when the Westgate Attack happened in Nairobi. It was a global attack. Yes, it was a terrorist attack that happened at a mall. It was all over international news. It basically shook the world because it was relatable to everybody. Everybody goes to a shopping mall. It doesn't matter what country you might have been in, but to be able to think that an attack of that level or extreme could have happened in a capital city somewhere in the middle of East Africa, it was totally relatable for the whole world. And
to get back to the Westgate terrorist attack was shocking. And I remember I was busy working. It was a Saturday morning, and I was working with a client when I got this message from your brother saying something big is going down in Westgate, and Sadia is trapped in the middle of it, and it's not a robbery. And then on the edge of my seat, as Riz was trying to get as much information through to me as to what was happening, but I sat there sensing, I was saying to the people around me, I think this is a terrorist attack going on. So what happened to you in that time whilst you were in Westgate that really was like mind-blowing for you?
When the attack occurred, when it all started, of course, everyone first thought that it was just a robbery that's gone wrong. People thought that, because there were tons of banks in the malls, that was just, a bank robbery of the sort. But when we heard the first grenade go off, then we heard the other two, and then we saw people running in to the rooftop from inside the mall, because that's where we were positioned. I was working with East FM, a radio station then, and we had a cooking competition for kids. So it's something like MasterChef, but we called it Super Chef for radio, but for kids, so Super Chef Junior. And I was one of the presenters on duty that day who were doing live links from location to just kind of give updates on air about this, what's going on, and so cooked this and that and the other. So two guys came up the ramp towards the rooftop parking, and the other two were downstairs in the rest of the mall. So of course we didn't see or hear all that was going on inside. I just remember and know what happened upstairs. So the two guys came up just shooting open fire. I honestly don't remember so much of it. One, because it's been so long, but I think I also processed it so much and everything happened so fast that it just kind of happened, It's just like another event that happened in my life. It wasn't, it still is significant. It was life-shifting. It changed my life completely.
In fact, I'm going to stop you there, because you've actually embraced the essence of what this process does, in exactly what you said there. I mean, that's a traumatic thing. I can remember pictures of you surrounded by dead bodies and blood and all that sort of stuff, and you sitting there unharmed, which was one of your charges, that, why me and why others, and so on, and actions that you took. And yet here you are sitting here saying, I don't really remember it, it's not really that significant anymore. That doesn't mean you're undermining the significance. It means you're no longer emotionally engaged in it, and you've been able to use it powerfully because of it to move on. Would you say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
But what you've said is the epitome of what the process does, which is mind-blowing. It's like, how do you move on from a terrorist attack like that, surrounded by so much death and trauma, and be able to say, it's not that significant anymore, even though it defined who I became and is why I'm where I am today. So let's go on. So you were stuck there, and then what happened?
I remember sending my mom an SMS, and this was just around the time that she was probably doing her lunchtime prayers. So she hadn't seen my message. So I sent a text saying that there's like hundreds of gunshots. It sounds like something's really, really going down. And like you said, Riz was already in touch with you, but I hadn't communicated with him yet. I think he didn't even realize that I was at Westgate yet, until I called my mom when I got triggered by somebody else who was around me to call. She called her loved one to say that I don't know if I'm coming home alive or dead. I just want to call you to tell you I love you. So I called my mom to say exactly the same thing. So she thought I was messing with her until she heard gunfire behind me. And then she started screaming, and then Riz grabbed the phone from her. And he stayed on the phone with me for all those 2 hours that I was in there. So he kind of shifted my focus. He was like, look, just, calm down. Who's around you? Are there any kids around you? Okay, hold kids' hands. Get everybody to hold their hands. So just kind of like got everybody to calm down and just super chill. And then he kept asking me, what's going on here? Do you see anything? Like, just, to be super aware of my surroundings in that moment. And then it kind of went quiet. And Riz was still on the phone, but he's like, I'll call you back. So he used his airtime to ring me. And I was able to only send one picture. I had a BlackBerry at the time. I still have that picture. It's on my blog. And he shared it on Twitter, and that went viral. And I specifically just remember sitting there and listening to the voices of the attackers and saying, this is that terrorist attack that we've been speaking about for the last 2 years. Because all of a sudden, our security at malls had increased. We never used to have security checks at malls, if you remember back in the 90s, Janetta. All of a sudden, we've got these screening devices and everyone's checking each other before they get in. So I'm like, oh, wow, I'm in the middle of the attack that we've been talking about all these years. Wonderful. But I was super calm, and I honestly thank Riz for that, because he really did help, just, by being a voice on the other end. And that helped me calm everybody else down around us as well. But then it got to a point where everyone's getting hungry. It's been 2 hours. We're out in the sun on the rooftop. It's a bit quiet. And then all of a sudden, this guy just showed up out of nowhere. He called himself an ex-SAS Irish server, I suppose. And he had a civilian with him who had a gun as well. And they came and had an escape route. And this was one of the biggest charges I had. And Jeanette, I remember specifically working with you on this one, was that I was the first person to go down the stairs when they found an escape route for us, while everybody else kind of just got scared and sat there by themselves, wondering, should we go down or should we not? And I was like, I'm out, I'm leaving, bye. But that I didn't realize that actually helped others follow me and come out of that space as well. So my guilt for the longest time was I was being selfish by being the first one to go down, not realizing I was being courageous enough to be the first person to go down and have everybody else follow me out to safety. But you helped me realize that, because I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I mean, the questions really get very specific as to where one's guilt and shame sits that you're not even aware of. And you suddenly, I remember you sitting there going, I got it. I'm feeling really bad that I abandoned kids and I just ran and looked after myself. And then you were able to realize that if you hadn't done that, you probably would have all been killed, because the terrorists were coming back all the time and making sure they could find people still alive to kill. They were coming back from inside, back up to the top. And that if you hadn't taken actually the courage to run and go down there and be the first, because as much as it may look like an act of not being courageous, because that's how you felt, it was equally an act of courage, because both are present in any situation. That's what the process helps you to understand. And that in applying lack of courage and going down there, it gave the courage to others to follow you that they wouldn't have done necessarily. And you were able to go, oh my gosh, I inadvertently helped to save their lives, because if we'd stayed there, correct?
True, absolutely true. And I remember working on that with you, because as soon as I got back home and I got rescued and I came home, the first thing I did was shower, change, and then just got online with you and started working on the whole process.
Yeah.
And I think had we not done that, the following years, I don't know what would have happened to my brain. Because the other thing that I've recently understood is when you were so close to grenades, because there were quite a few grenades that went off around us, it messes with the frequency of your brain. And I realized that because much later I fell through into...
Okay, I've lost you.
Depression. But that came having done the process with you and realizing that I need to go live my best life. So I quit my job, went on a solo trip out of Kenya for the first time. And we spoke about this during my life coaching course with you from 2012 to 2013. We set milestones and we set so many goals. And even though I didn't meet them in the time span that we had planned for, I did them eventually, you know? So I can never say that I never left Kenya. I left Kenya several times after to different countries within Africa, which opened my mind even more. And that led me to open my own consultancy. And I worked with so many different industry folk, learned so much about social media. And it's just interesting in time of COVID-19 and coronavirus that we're all online And I'm like, oh, I know how to use all these apps because we've been using them all these years.
Exactly. I've actually been saying, people have been saying, how are you adapting to this? I'm saying, well, actually, I'm going, hello, everybody, welcome to my world, because I work so much in isolation a lot of the time. I'm internationally out there, but I'm physically isolated. Many years where I've worked on my own in isolation for day in, day out, not seeing anybody physically or interacted physically, eyeball to eyeball. And it's amazing how these things work out. But I wanted to ask you, what would you say was the most defining thing? What out of Westgate worked, that if Westgate hadn't happened, wouldn't have happened in your life? What did it give you? What skills, what tools, what experience did it give you that if Westgate had never happened, what wouldn't be working right now? So what wouldn't be working if Westgate hadn't happened?
I think or believe that I would have been stuck in all the stories that I ran for the longest time about not having enough money to be able to travel, not being able to leave the house that I'm living in because I couldn't afford it. So it's more or less an attachment to money. And that attachment to money stayed with me for even after Westgate happened. And it's only recently that I've been able to actually understand my relationship with it and coming to a point where it's no longer my main concern.
Yeah. So what did Westgate give you? What did it push you to do and to become that would have left you stuck? So monetarily, you believe you would have not started on the journey of bringing money into balance. What else? What else did Westgate and that trauma push you into doing and to becoming that would be missing now if it hadn't happened to you?
Strangely enough, it made my relationship with my mother and my brother even stronger.
In what way? What happened?
I believe because of, again, this depression and, the religion. We come from an Islamic background and, like being forced to be a certain way and being forced to behave a certain way and not talk about specific things and don't question this and don't question that. It helped me break my mom's belief system that she was fed for such a long time. And if you meet her now, 7 years later, you wouldn't believe that she's the same person, especially because you have met her, Janetta, and you've done some work with her as well. You'd be in complete awe to see how much it shifted her. So using Westgate as a perfect example, call it a landmark in my life. I was 25 years old when that happened. It was a month after my birthday. And using that to just shift everything, the tools, the skills that you taught me, collapsing stories, equilibration. My favorite term that you ever used was, you're always going to be uncomfortable and stuck in that same place. You're comfortable being uncomfortable, but the moment you're uncomfortable being uncomfortable is when things start to change. And that's when things started to change.
Yeah.
Westgate was basically, it was like a shake. It woke me up, like, wake up, and that's when the work and the process and everything started. So basically the tools and the skills that you gave me, I applied them into my life and I've been using them ever since.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think that's one of the things is it's the fact that the process works on a conscious and an unconscious level. And why I get so inspired with it is that when I used to be a motivational speaker, people thought they could only feel fired up and energized if they came to get a dose of me. I always say it felt like I was their drug. And why I love this process so much is that as much as I work with the person, most of the time people are gone between 4 sessions. They might come back for top-ups, but most people are gone because they've got the skills for themselves and they can now apply it. I mean, when last did you have a session with me? 7 years ago. And it's amazing, and that's what inspires me so much and makes it such an authentic experience for me doing this work, is that as much as it's like, oh, okay, another client is gone, okay, but the other part of me is going, yes, this is what I wanted to be able to do, is help people to become empowered and do it for themselves, so I'm not their guru for the rest of their life, following me around like Pied Piper. And that's really where you've been able, you walk the walk, talk the talk. You're a shining example of having taken this, being uncomfortable, and used it and applied it, and sitting where you are today in an inspiring but still challenged place, because the challenge is important. It's not about getting rid of the challenge. One of the things that I often talk about, and I don't know if you remember this, I'm sure you do, but I talk about this often, is how whatever you fear or fantasize about in your life, because it's an extremely attached emotion or thought process or both, you will attract people and circumstances into your life. That's why they say that which you fear about most comes to you, unless you learn how to bring that extreme fear and judgment into really authentic manageability. And I'm going to share this part. You can share your part of what this really gave me an aha on. But all the time I was working with Westgate people over the following weeks after the attack, because I flew back into Nairobi to work it with people. And all that time that happened, people were saying, you know, we go to Westgate every single Saturday without fail, and yet that Saturday my mother-in-law fell ill, or we decided to rather stay in bed, and there was a whole lot of people I was meeting saying we should have been there and we weren't there. And then the people I was dealing with, and I went, there has to be something with that which you fear most scenario. There's a connection here. So I started saying to the people who didn't, tell me, was your most biggest fear being shot at and blown up and attacked? And the people who weren't there were saying no. You know, I mean, obviously it's not something I would invite, but it's not my greatest fear. I have other fears that are far greater. And then when I was interviewing the people, or not interviewing, but working with the people in Westgate, they were going, yeah, gee, it's been my biggest charge ever, is that I'm petrified, or I was petrified of being attacked or blown up and terrorized and being in a traumatic situation. So that really was like, wow, here is kind of like proof of that mindset, that emotion set manifesting what you're fearing most, and how valuable it is to learn the tools to manage that from an open heart, so that your life balances out in a more open-hearted, manageable way. But what really blew my mind was when I asked you the question. And what did you answer?
I honestly don't even remember what I answered.
I wondered whether you would or wouldn't. This is what you answered. You said to me, I had this feeling that my life was boring and that I'd like something exciting to happen, something meaningfully exciting that would feel meaningful and have substance in my life. And then I realized that when you fantasize, that can happen. So that which you fantasize, and I've worked with it in other forms where people have fantasized something and then it's happened, and because it's in extreme fantasy, the equal amount of nightmare kicks in. And you were one of the ones that were in fantasy of something happening like that, not in fear and not in nightmare. And it was like,
I remember now.
You do remember that?
I remember now. Yeah, I remember the fantasy itself, but it just manifested in a very different way.
Yes.
I always had imagined that I would get some sort of accident, like something silly was going to happen to me. And I'm in hospital, and everybody's coming to see me, and everyone's got flowers, and yada, yada, yada. But after the Westgate attack, thankfully was not physically hurt at all. But I still had people come home with flowers and everything. So I got all the attention that I had fantasized a while ago. And it's true. A lot of people feel that how could you fantasize about such a thing? And I remember one example that you gave me a while ago when we spoke about exactly this, how your fears or your fantasies manifest. And I hate to go in a direction that is apparently frowned upon, but a lot of men and women would fantasize about orgies, for example, and that fantasy can manifest as a result of a gang rape.
Yes.
So it's an interesting way to have a think or look at how you process your thoughts and how you fantasize and fear certain things.
Yes.
And results come out in different ways.
It's so true, especially if you're fantasizing from a place of belief that it'll give you a high. Its resultant low will kick in to balance you out. That's what the process is all about. So if your fantasy is that life is better being like this, then your psyche and your world around you then shows you it's equal and opposite. For every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So it's being able, because sometimes fantasy is necessary. The very sexual act is very fantastical, really, and whilst you're engaging with it, it's really not in the present. You're present with each other, but there's quite a lot of fantasy in there that makes it work. So it's not saying that fantasy shouldn't be there or the fears shouldn't be there. But it's saying that when you're working this process, you bring the fantasy and the fear or the nightmare into a place of manageability so that you can do fantasy nightmare in that place of balance. And then it's more spontaneous and authentic and not coming from a place of fear and judgment.
I agree. I remember another thing that you'd spoken with me about a long time ago was extremes. When you're in an extreme emotion, so if you're super happy or you're super sad, you're coming from a charged place, you're coming from a charged emotion. And it's important to come back to just balancing out, because when you're acting from whatever side of the spectrum you might be, you're manifesting whatever that feeling is, right?
Yeah. Amazing. So, Sadia, out of it all, what would you say has been your most defining outcome from subsequent to having had Westgate happen? What's been your biggest aha happening because of Westgate?
My attachment to death.
To death?
Yep.
Okay.
After Westgate, obviously I saw so much. I lost a colleague, I lost people I knew around me, I had so many friends who were injured from the attack. And then later in life, so many other incidents happened. The most recent one was I was working in Zanzibar with clients, and one of my colleagues, we found him washed up on shore, and I had to pull him out of the ocean, take him to the clinic, only for him to die on the bed by having a heart attack, not by drowning, and then having to arrange an entire funeral in a completely foreign land. And when I came back to Nairobi, I just sat with myself for the longest time. I kind of slipped into a depression because I didn't really understand everything that happened. And this is when everything started to work for me. I feel all that we learned together, what you taught me, the skills, the tools, everything from 7 years ago, finally were actually applied last year, and I did it on my own. And as a result, just, going within myself, isolating in a way that now I call solitude, which I'm so happy and grateful for. Just coming out of it and being like, we're all going to die anyway, but we just don't know how we're going to die. So that's why when people tell you live every day as if it's your last, I get it. So now I have no excuses and I just live life to the fullest every single day. So when I look back and I look at my legacy, I'm like, oh, I started open mic nights. So my purpose that I had figured out with you when we did the course together 7 years ago, I've actually lived it. I'm actually doing it. I'm helping artists of all sectors come to life, help them, imagine their best selves when they get on stage. I give veterans an opportunity to speak about their journey in Kenya. And that's all it really is, isn't it? We all just want our stories to be heard, and that's our legacy.
Yeah. And from a place of living life to the fullest, not for highs or avoiding lows, but from an authentic place of appreciation. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. And it's just so wonderful and inspiring to see that you've stepped into that zone, being able to use these tools and techniques mostly by yourself, and just to say, a huge salute and so honorable, and well done. It's just a wonderful testimony, really.
Now, you were a blessing and you still are a blessing, and I'm so grateful for you, and I love you to bits.
Feelings mutual. Sadia, thank you so much for joining us today. And as I say, I'm so pleased you were our first interview in this series of interviews, and can't wait to see you again when I'm next in Kenya. And have a wonderful weekend coming up, and huge amounts of love. Speak to you soon.